This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a veteran U.S. Army officer, leadership expert, and a Forbes coach. His clients span across a variety of industries from startups to public companies. He takes leadership development to the next level, combining computer wargaming simulations with behavioral profiling. He's the author of an upcoming book entitled Managing Chaos, the Emergent Leader. This is Kevin Black. Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Kevin, my friend, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement. The tribe's going to be really into today's conversation. I think this is the sweet spot for where everybody tunes in to listen to. So again, welcome to the movement.
Thank you so much. I am really, really excited about this.
You know, Kevin, for everybody, they just heard your bio intro and they know your last name is Black. And I love that you have incorporated your last name into something pretty clever for the name of your website. Your website's called Black Market Leadership. So there's even some like woo around it and everything. And I love it because when you think black market, something's got to be up. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on today, I think, a little bit, because one of the things, Kevin, that I found intriguing about you and that I wanted you on the show about was you were like, hey, look, I don't just offer leadership, and I'm not offering leadership mainstream wise. I offer leadership for people that really consider themselves disruptors or status quo breakers. So talk to us a little bit about what gave you the confidence to say that's who you go after, and why do you say it?
So thank you. You know, I've been in this industry for 20 years, and a nice way of saying it is I've just frankly, in the civilian world, I've been frankly underwhelmed by a lot of leadership development out there today. It feels like we live in a therapeutic world of leadership development. And, I spent 6 years in the Army, and one of the things I learned, probably one of the most important elements I've learned in the Army was leadership, in the sense that leadership really has two major pillars, and that is mission and people. But I feel like today, a lot of leadership development things that you read, especially on LinkedIn, it's just exclusively people. It's all about communication, emotional intelligence, all of which, by the way, are very important. But you're missing the other half, the mission. And in my experience of working with other companies, if you're working with a CEO or a founder or an owner, guess what they're interested in? Getting a return on investment, right?
That's right. I mean, that is business. At the end of the day, we do talk about optimizing teams, right? We do, and it's always people-centric. It's always a human-centric vibe to that. But when you boil it all down, business is to make money. The business world in our capitalistic society is to move forward in profitability, generate revenue, all of those kind of things. And people sometimes are a little shy to even say that.
They really are, and it's a shame because, look, there's nothing wrong with profits, with revenues. Look, when you're a part of a business, you're helping to create something new, something great, and guess what? You're getting a hell of an education. You're learning about people, about management, about strategy. You're really developing yourself. So, I think we need to, when we look at work should be seen as something that is great, not just a daily grind or obligation. It should be looked at as an adventure. And I think if you have the right kind of company and the right kind of leadership that sees it that way, it can make work fun, and it can really make something that you really want to do and be a part of.
So I'm going to continue to pull the string on you a little bit here. So if you have a traditional CEO, a traditional C-suiter, they are going to say, well, I went to a highfalutin B school, and there's no doubt you're preaching now that it's all about revenue generation and margins and all of that stuff. But I'm going to go back to my first question. Why do you feel you need to attract, or you are attracted to, disruptors and status quo breakers? Is it those CEOs that realize that they've gone too far on the people side? Is it for people that are middle managers and are trying to decide, well, everybody's telling me now it is all about people, and should I not even worry about this capitalistic play? Like, why the status quo breaker, and what does a status quo breaker look like in your eyes?
So I think when you look at disruption, I am extraordinarily biased. I have a lot of biases, and one is, especially in behaviors, I am very fast paced. I love innovation, and I don't like rules. So guess what? I gravitate towards the people and companies that really share my kind of value. And it just so happens that in terms of disruption, a major element of disruption is innovation. It's breaking norms, but you don't do that by committees. You don't do it through the traditional, let's sit down and talk. Sometimes you have to have rough conversations. Sometimes you ruffle feathers, but guess what? You can create some really, really great things. You can really set new norms. And that's what I've always been attracted to. So, circling back to your original question, why black market leadership? I'm offering the kind of education for people who have ambition, for people who really want to do something fun and new with their life, create something new. So, going back to terms of leadership in of itself, to me, is just a very boring. It's a very boring thing just to study. If you're going to study leadership, you have to understand the components which make it: behaviors, decision making, critical thinking, even strategy. And that's a real big part of what I do. Is I connect leadership and strategy. In my view, leadership and strategy are interrelated, and the better your leaders are, the greater the chances of you actualizing your strategy. So if you're going to have a real education in leadership, you have to get rid of this traditional, it's just all people, it's just all emotional intelligence and communication. You have to look at the mission and the people, how to strategize, how to plan, how to hire, how to fire. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the nature of the beast. And I think if you accept that, just as you said earlier, you have to accept that business is about making money. You are in a much better position to be successful in today's world.
So you believe that there's a true gap on people that have swung too much on just kind of focusing on the EQ side of the house, and then you've got the other extremes of people that went into business school and they've almost turned into robots to where they're just watching spreadsheets and all that. There's the answer is really in the middle.
It's funny. Yes, I think the answer, you mentioned about business school and being all profit driven. I've read reports now where business schools are sending some of their grad or at least their students to the liberal arts area. Now, look, for the audience here, I have a liberal arts master's, which was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. It was almost like going through a mini North Korea indoctrination. So, when you send those business students to these programs, it's like, you're just feeding the fire of anti-business. So I'm not sure if all business schools are really profit motive. I'm really not. But the other thing you mentioned about EQ, recently I just read an article about EQ, which is fascinating. EQ, there's so many things today which are industries. This article talked about how EQ, it's almost about getting harmony, getting strong relationships and creating harmonious workplaces, which is great. But guess what? If you're going to have a disruptive company, you know what EQ really doesn't serve well for? Innovation, ruffling feathers, creating arguments or conflict, those things which are necessary for disruption. So in my view, I think EQ is important, but guess what? It's just another industry. It's another business. It has its place, but you got to realize that when you have these options available to you out there, it's usually just an industry in itself. And I think there are a lot of blind sides to a lot of things which are important out there.
So Kevin, it's an interesting factor that you just brought up, right? About EQ, and sometimes the fact that maybe that's just a little bit too far to the right and all of that. It's one of the reasons that I specifically chose the title of this podcast, Iron Sharpens Iron, right? You have to have that friction. You have to have that hard contact on the forge to really create something beautiful. And that's what you're getting at too, right? Like let's take all the political correctness out of it for a minute. Let's take all of that in order to truly disrupt, in order to really be innovative. It's not going along with the flow.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's funny, you mentioned the word friction. If there's one thing that I have noticed, whether it was 6 years active duty Army or it's working with small businesses, even up to Fortune 500, it's one thing I've noticed is that leaders today are not prepared to deal with chaos. They treat chaos and disruption and friction as anomalies. But the fact is, if you're living in life and you're progressing, friction and chaos are normal. They're normal parts of things. So the better you manage it, the better you are to go through everyday obstacles, even capitalize on opportunities which you didn't see. So I think we treat friction, like you said, as a bad thing. It can slow you down, but it's normal. You just got to learn how to wade through it.
So, do you think post COVID, let's go into the future a few years, do you think because of this massive pandemic event that disrupted the world, do you think there will be more of a focus on this? There's more of an acceptance of we have got to embrace chaos because it seems in the last year, one of the greatest lessons that the world economy has learned is those that adapted and understood agility were successful through this. Those that tried to rage against the machine and just fight, the pandemic and be the same way that they've always been are more than likely not in business right now.
That's a great question. I think if you're an optimist, you could say that, but
Yeah.
there's a quote. I'm trying to find this quote, but it was by H.L. Mencken, and basically, I'm gonna paraphrase this, but it was in a sense that only a few men want freedom. Most men want security. And with freedom, you get friction. You also get the fruits of success. But most people like having security. And when you have security, you don't have friction. You have other people taking care of you. So if you're an optimist, I think people will learn. I think if you're a realist, it probably just get worse. But that's my yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think most entrepreneurs that are listening to this would be going, "Amen, Kevin, preach it." That's exactly what I live. But then probably 80% of this audience is really, if they're honest themselves, looking in the mirror, going, "Yep, I'm in for the security blanket." Right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does help if you're conscious about it, right? If you're very aware of where you stand, kind of in that spectrum.
I totally agree. Look, your values, it's like your behaviors. They're neither good nor bad. It's just who you are. But I think though, if you want to be successful, if you want to work with a team and actually have a successful organization, you have to do an inventory. Not of your assets, but of you. Who are you? What are you pursuing? How do you pursue it? And once you understand those things which motivate you, once you understand your behaviors of how you act, I think you'll learn that some people are more compatible with each other than others. And let me give you an example. Go on Netflix, if the audience, go on Netflix and watch this wonderful movie called The Founder with Michael Keaton about the story of McDonald's.
Yeah.
Great movie. But the conflict comes, there are many conflicts, but I think you'll see one of the central conflicts is that the McDonald's brothers and Ray Kroc by Michael Keaton, they are totally two different, when I say McDonald's brothers, I'm talking about them as a unit, totally two different people, not just in their behaviors, but in their values. Ray Kroc has a lot of ambition, lots of ambition. He's about control. And, I think he's getting long in the tooth, but he still acts like a 20-year-old man seeking, the fortune and fame. Whereas McDonald's brothers have struggled for years and years, but guess what? They don't have that ambition that he has anymore. So when you don't know each other, and you cannot articulate what you're really wanting in life and what you want in business, you have conflicts like that. And with Ray Kroc, what happens? He ultimately takes McDonald's from the McDonald's brothers.
So when you approach a business to go in there and say, "Hey, I think the leadership development program that you've had at organization X for the last 20 years has been horrible. And, I'm going to teach you some black market strategy and how to really be a different type of leader." But talk to us a little bit about that journey. Are you able to easily convince? Do you find? I'll say it in other ways. Do you find that organizations are desperately looking not for the easy answer, but for somebody to say, "Hey, solve this thing because it's been a disaster for years"?
Great question. So one thing is, if I'm invited to an organization, it's usually at the decision maker level. Either it's a SVP or a VP of marketing, of sales, or even a chief operating officer. They see what they have, they're not happy. But I don't come in. I never talk about how bad the program is. I don't have to. What I say is this. I can rapidly develop your leaders and teams in a matter of weeks instead of years. And I can actively help them contribute to your strategy, taking a lot of burden off of your shoulders. In essence, Mr. COO or Mrs. COO, I can help you get your ROI back, help you focus on the big picture instead of being mired in the tactics. Now, how do I do that? I use computer wargaming. And for the audience here, I do not mean like Call of Duty or the stuff you see on television. But yeah, I use what they call real-time strategy games. And if you're thinking about it, it's almost like Risk on steroids, but it's on the computer. And we bring teams in like a military staff where you have to plan, strategize, really organize a victory. You have to think strategically and not necessarily get in the tactics. And what happens is I teach you how to strategize and lead under pressure. But most importantly, though, I call these Dr. Phil moments because you get to see yourself under pressure. So you know how Dr. Phil will bring someone on stage and say, you know what, you're a maniac. No, I'm not. And then behind him, he's got a huge screen and he shows the guy, rampaging through his home. And the guy's like, oh my God, I am. That's what the gaming does. It allows people in a very, very safe environment to fail. It allows them to see what they're doing, and what they're doing is always projected. It's replicated, or it is a sample of what they're doing every day in the office. So in the safe environment, you can see how you're acting. And by doing this, by working together and strategizing, you're learning about team dynamics, what each person's values are, what their behaviors are. But most importantly, you're learning how to align, how to communicate, how to plan together based on your behaviors. And then what we do is we take those templates and strategies and help those teams create strategic initiatives that they bring to the C-suite. C-suite doesn't have to have all the ideas. Your teams are bringing you in new strategic initiatives, ideas, which can be implemented if you choose to. So we're really helping them drive strategy from the ground up. So what's the reception? It's a great reception because I'm taking a lot of stress off the senior leadership. But I think the big thing is, for what I do, again, it's usually the major decision makers. It's usually not through HR, even learning and development. It's usually head of sales, head of marketing says, I need to get my people aligned right now, and we're going to use this program. So in 2 or 3 days, you see dramatic increases in performance.
So let me push on you a little bit for better understanding. If you take a group of people and they're working already as a team in their work area, and they're doing things every single day, and if we were just going to have a strategy session and put up a bunch of posters, on the walls and create a strategy, what does the gaming do? Does the gaming just break them out of their shell and make them realize that you are doing this in the context of business, but because you're in the gaming simulation, it's kind of a different vibe? And does that kind of defog them? Are you using it kind of as a vehicle to defog their brains and get their critical thinking just in a different avenue?
Great question. First of all, it's experiential. And what that experience does is it gives them a central reference point. So many strategy sessions today, unfortunately, you have consultants come in and they put these big, Post-its on the wall, and they basically make a big to-do list. That's not strategy. A strategy basically is a simplified 2 to 3, maybe 4 major objectives, which can be dissected into major essential tasks. But the point of a strategy is, how do you accomplish it? Who's on my right flank? Who's on my left flank? For instance, in the gaming, there's a term called a main effort, and it's very popular in the military. But if you have a team of 5 people and I am the main effort of that team, what does that mean? It doesn't just mean I'm the most important of that team. It means I get primary support. If you're on my left and I need help, you need to stop to support me. Now I say that right now, and people are nodding their heads. Okay, it makes sense. But when you do the gaming, if you don't do it, you get your butts whooped. You lose big time. And you know what happens? You feel it. And why did you lose, Sarah? Well, I apparently I didn't support the main effort. What does that mean? And they start seeing these reasons why we have to mutually support the people around us. Our work as a team, it doesn't stop at the limits or borders of our team. We have to be able to support marketing, corporate communications. That means we have to talk. And when people learn to talk, not just hearing me say it, but actually learn and do it, and they see the success after it, they now have points of reference. They remember. I've had people say this. Remember the Battle of Berlin where we lost? This is happening right here, people. And you start seeing these heads nod. Oh my God, it is. So you're really giving people experiences that they really wouldn't get unless they're really, really focused on the next 4, 5, 10 years of working together, but in a safe environment where they're having fun, where it's not boring business, but they're leading armies. They're actually having fun, and success and failure really depends on their decisions. They really take some real lessons away.
So one of the things you talked about, though, is the future leader is going to learn how to manage chaos. Is chaos incorporated into these simulations?
Yes, but in different forms.
Okay.
Yes. So one thing we do prior to a behavioral a workshop is I do a behavioral profile on each person. And I get to know who this person is in terms of how they act. What's their natural inclination to acting? Some people are big picture. Some people like a lot of detail. So if I want to test your behaviors, let's say, for instance, you're all about details. I'll make you the commander, meaning you are responsible for the success or failure of this mission. By the way, you're in a different room. You can't see the game going on. I will give you a mission which is extraordinarily wide open, which gives you 100 different possibilities to accomplish it. That could be almost paralyzing to someone who likes detail, who likes rigid structure. And vice versa. If you're someone like myself who loves big picture and likes just, the minimal essentials, I might give you a mission with 20 different metrics for success. And what does that do? That teaches you to slow down. And the beauty about the gaming is when you customize it, you can actually customize it based on the company. So if you have a startup in a brand new industry, I can give you a wide open mission, which actually resonates to what's happening right now. You can maximize your efforts, but you might have some loss. You might take casualties. You might have some waste. Or if you're in a mature organization, I could throw a ton of detail on you so you can feel the stress that your boss feels with all the rules and regulations you have to adhere to.
Taking the simulation out of it for a second, you mentioned also you're a big behavioral analysis person, which is really like assessments and things like that. So talk to me from your point of view on, I know that you're a Forbes coach and you've been coaching senior executives for many years. So how do you see the value in assessments, and what do you think the person who is assessed gains the most out of these things? Because probably, again, 90% of the listening audience here has probably taken Myers-Briggs. They probably have taken Strength Finders or DISC or any of those. And they're like, oh, I've done assessments. I know that I'm a XYZ or a blue and a red and all of those kind of things. Give me your insights into the world of assessments.
So first of all, I am enormously, I wish I had known about behaviors when I was lieutenant in the Army. It would have really changed my career. But saying that, most tools out there, including I think the ones you mentioned, I'm trying to be very politically correct. They're not. I've used them. I know of them. I would never use them. Most of those tools out there are not scientific. Especially the very popular ones. They're not scientific at all. And so what does that mean? What's the danger? A lot of these tools do not discriminate between who you are and who you think you are. Meaning, when you fill these assessments out, a lot of them they fulfill your confirmation bias. If I think I'm a decisive leader, I fill out that survey like I'm a decisive leader. And frankly, I think so. Saying that behaviors have an incredibly important element in leadership. I mean, incredibly important, but you have to use the right tool. And most tools, I would say, my experience, 95% of tools out there are not very effective. And that's probably why when you talk to a lot of probably your audience, they've done it. Yeah, I've done it. And that's probably their response. Who cares? That's another reason is you probably have the wrong people explain the tool to you. A lot of companies rely on HR to do that. And I'm not really bashing HR here, but what I'm saying is to use a behavioral tool, you have to know why you're using it. You're not doing it just to classify people. You have to understand what it means to leadership, what it means to strategy. How do I leverage these behaviors? So I'm not going to give any names here, but I'll say the best tool that I've ever used does three things. It tells you who you are naturally. It tells you who or how you are role playing or modifying. Meaning, if someone is a big picture person, but you put them in a role where they're focused on task and detail, that stresses them out. And that's a third thing a good tool will show you is a snapshot of stresses. And if you take that information, who they are, how they're masquerading, and their stress levels, it allows you to see what their natural talents are, what's happening in their environment, which might be impeding them, and ultimately, what are those things which they need to do to really up their game. And I think if you know that about your people, and really not focus on these supposed deficiencies, but focus on the strengths. What does this person really bring to the team? If you know those strengths, you could have just a well-rounded, a high-performing team. But unfortunately, a lot of tools out there, they're not very good, and I think people know it because they're not used correctly.
That's right. And have you found that most people, when they reach out to do these type of assessments, are they accepting of it? Does it take some time to kind of break down people's barriers? Because you're really exposing people when you do this, right? They're walking around in this kind of unconscious state of mind that they think they're a particular type of person. And you're coming in, Kevin, and saying, well, you're really this. What are the reactions of people?
Well, it's funny because the reactions are often based on their behaviors. There's some behavioral profiles out there which will cringe if you do anything to expose them, to reveal who they are. I literally mean they will cringe. They really only do it under duress, because they're just very uncomfortable. And those kind of behavioral profiles, I would never approach them and say, this is you. I would sit down with them and say, this is a survey you filled. I give all the explanation to how many usages, the scientific validity. Here is the responses from your input. And sometimes I even give the report to them a week or two in advance so they can read it. That's one behavioral profile. Another profile, like me, you show it to me, I'm like, damn, that's amazing. You're mind reading. And I totally accept it. So again, that's really based on the behaviors, but some people are very, very open to it. Some are not. And of course, there are people who, even though they might have a very open behavioral profile, they're not open to it. And to me, that's a great sign that they're not coachable.
So, with all your experience of running your consulting business and coaching, you've got an upcoming book that you've been working on here, and it's called Managing Chaos. And it's a combination of all the things that I think we have talked about through your eyes. But can you expose some other things that you think are important for that up and coming leader? That's like, man, I'm sucking all this stuff up. I've taken 2 pages of notes already listening to Kevin, and all of this is making some sense to me, but feed me some more. So what does the book get after, truly?
So earlier I had said how leadership and strategy are interrelated. Now, in strategy, look, here's another industry unto itself, strategy. I think you can boil down strategy to one question, and even though it's a very broad look at it, I think it really describes one way or another. And that question is this: can you anticipate the future? And what you'll find is, if you say yes, then you fall into what we call a certain archetype of strategy called a deliberate strategy. Now, you mentioned earlier business schools. There's a guy you probably heard of, Michael Porter. He's like the patriarch of deliberate strategy. And what is a deliberate strategy? Is usually based on the assumption that you can't anticipate the future. That means, think about this. If I know what's going to happen in the future, think about the investment in intelligence, the investment in planning. It means you do very long, deliberate, methodical planning. I know I'm going from A, B, C, D, and E because I know I can get there. So when you have that kind of mechanical, in a sense, a very mechanistic approach, what kind of emphasis on execution? It's managerial. You have people overseeing processes.
So true.
But now here's the big but of this. I think McKinsey had a report come out 2 or 3 years ago that 90% of company strategies fail to actualize as intended. Why? Because there's this thing called change. So So going back to my central question, can you anticipate the future? If you say no, I cannot anticipate the future, then you fall into what they call an emergent strategy, and you get the term. It's emerging. So in a sense, if a deliberate strategy gives you a particular lane to drive down, like a one lane on a highway, an emergent strategy says, I can't anticipate the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify a highway, a general direction. It might have 12 lanes in it. And as we go, we are going to flip, we're going to switch different lanes, but we're going in that general direction. But for the person listening out here, what does the emergent strategy rely on to go forward in its intended direction? If you can't anticipate the future, you can't plan for it, right? So you have a huge emphasis on leadership, people on the ground to make situational decisions, which in a sense are in the spirit of the general approach, but not in the letter, because that letter, that specificity is not there because you can't anticipate the future. That's why if you're working, especially if you're a new company, if you're a new industry, if you're a disruptive company, you have to look at leadership development not as a check the box kind of thing. I mean, given a lot of ways that leadership development is, that's way it looks like it's check the box. But you have to look at it in strategic view. You're developing people to make decisions at the operational level, to capitalize on potential opportunities in a very quick manner, sometimes even without the permission of the C-suite. That's fine. You need that to be flexible, but you have to realize people have to be trained and are really educated to manage that chaos. They have to know each other. They have to have official systems of communication. They have to know what a strategic intent is. All of these things which give people the initiative or the permission to take the initiative, but while restricting them to certain resources and time.
When does leadership training and education and experiences begin with someone?
Well, technically today, again, I think I'm using information from Burson by Deloitte. Technically, if you're in corporate America, the average age of a person who begins leadership training is 42. 42.
Holy cow.
Ridiculous. Yeah. So if you start getting leadership training between the ages of 20 to 30, you are in the 11th percentile. I think, you're 30 years Air Force. I'm 6 years Army. The earlier you get leadership development, I think obviously the better. But your leadership development has to incorporate management, project planning, strategy. I think too often times we associate the word strategy with corporate headquarters, as if the old men and women up there are,
true.
The elders are putting the master plans together. No. If you can learn it now, if you can learn to understand that strategy is applicable in your everyday life and start making the connections to what you do today to the larger company, I think you're in a very, very good spot. So what age? The earlier, the better. Read military history, read business history, read biographies. Look not just how people treat one another, but how they design teams, what their original vision was, what their aim was, and most importantly, how did they even accomplish their missions and what happened? Those lessons are really pertinent. If you could get that, if you can really appreciate that, the younger you are, the much better, your position for success later on.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, Kevin. And I hope a lot of the folks that are listening here really take that to heart when, I think a vast majority of our listeners on the tribe here are taking away things for themselves and all of that. But, this iron sharpens iron mindset is truly about servant leading. And this is one of the greatest presents that you could give anybody, is gifts that you could give someone, is to get them involved in leadership and leadership experiences and training and all of that as early as possible in their careers.
So, and if I'd like to add one more thing, if I could, leadership is not for everyone. You do not have to be a leader. And I can tell you, I have coached many people who, for some reason in their value systems, think they have to be a people leader. Like, no, you don't have to. Look, I don't see leadership necessarily as a sacrosanct role or position. I see it just as a practical thing that has to be done. It's very hard. But if you can do it, then you can obviously raise your value. If not, become a very good technical leader. But just know, if you want to do it for the right reasons.
Yeah, Kevin, great point. I mean, that is something that is not, if I'm guilty too, because we talk about leadership and that is my lane kind of thing, but it is absolutely correct. It is a constant reminder that not everybody's a leader. Not everybody can be a leader. There is nothing wrong with sled dogs, that if you are a technical expert and you enjoy it and you love it and you are the one that wants to turn that wrench all day long, we need to embrace those kind of people and not take them out of those positions and force them to lead if they don't want to.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think you might agree with me. Not everyone should be a leader. It's you know,
That is exactly right.
yeah. So whatever your choices are, good for you. If you want to learn leadership, learn it. Even if you don't want to be a leader, learn about it. Because if one thing leadership will tell you or give you knowledge, it will be how to leverage strengths, especially under chaos. And those are lessons which I think are applicable to any solopreneur out there.
So, Kevin, I totally agree, and I love how you've clarified, in your world, what the word of disruptors and status quo breakers really mean. And I think we've gone on this journey here in the last 30 minutes of discovering how we all can fall into that if we need to. And I know you're a huge history buff too, and I think even that's what your education is in. So, can you kind of lead us out of this podcast here by summing up from your perspective, and maybe if you want to bring in some history here about how lessons from history tie into today and tomorrow's world for why we should be embracing the emergent leader.
Oh wow! I tell you, we talk about we talk about emergent strategy, basically making it up as you go along. If there's one thing which is so fascinating about American history. And you're right. I've taught American military history for 10 years now. If there's one thing which is so fascinating about American military history is that we had never, ever, ever been prepared for a war. We always enter wars unprepared. In fact, when we entered World War II, for the audience out there, we had 200,000 soldiers. I think it was the 18th largest army in the world. I think Paraguay had an army bigger than ours. But at the end of the war, really 3.5 years later, we had over 11 million and created the first modern army. So if you want to, American military history is if you really want to learn about disruption, about growth, about emerging, there's so many great examples in it. So I really recommend. I love military history, not just because of my prior service, but I would tell you, military history in itself has so many lessons because it integrates disciplines of behaviors, of personalities. I mean, think about this. In our country, we put a huge premium on human life. So in World War II, if Americans attacked you, there's an old quip about if you knew a German's attacked you, if you saw a squad of soldiers run to a village and blow the village up, you knew Americans attacked you after you shot into the force at the Americans. You hear nothing for 5 minutes, and then aircraft and artillery came in, blow the village up, and infantry come in. Because we have such emphasis on value on life. So my point is culture, history, personalities, behaviors, science, technology, all of those things are integrated into military history. And I promise you this, if you understand that, you'll see it in your business, your respect for technology, how you communicate, how people think, their backgrounds, diversity. You see all of those things in your normal business like you see in military history. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. I'm just sitting here going, amen. I'm just like, no, it's inspiring, actually. Kevin, I think if we look back on these military history moments, we look at examples, and it's inspiring to know, like, we can take those lessons learned and move forward. Everything that you've talked about today is still about forward movement. It's about becoming better no matter where you are, no matter where you're positioned, whether you're in charge of an organization or you've just graduated and you've entered your first organization. It's about making things better.
Absolutely. Progress. I love progress, especially individual progress. And I see working for either, if you're a consultant working for a company or you're in a company as a leader or a manager or just a technical leader, whatever, look at your travels as progress. You are developing yourself. This company is giving you the opportunity to better yourself, and the better ideas and better contribution you bring, either as a follower or a leader, whatever it is, you are increasing your value. You are raising, your performance. You're branding yourself. It's all good things. Just look at it in a very positive light like that, I think.
Well, Kevin, for these 40 minutes, you have increased our value. And for that, we are thankful. So thanks again for joining the Iron Sharpens Iron movement.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Kevin about helping to rapidly develop leaders and align teams to better execute strategy was just what we needed to hear for today's complex business environment. So don't forget that our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend as we want to continue to build the tribe. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.